Cognitive styles are another fashionable assertion from some authors. Your author clearly believes in it. I've had others that work on in the department here in psychology at SFA that don't believe it's a real thing. I'll let you make a decision. I think your author makes a pretty good case for it in a good number of instances. One example of a type of cognitive style is this idea of field dependence or field independence, a term coined by psychologists who study perceptual processing, and it refers to several phenomena, one of which is that some people find it easier than others to identify parts of a figure as being separate from the whole. An example of a task of field independence is shown at 14.3. So field-dependent individuals would have more difficulty finding this. And here it is. Field independence, could be able to see that 4, and then the dependence, I can't. It jumps off the page. Now, of course, I can't see it right away. In my case, I think I would need it to be pointed out to me. But the people that are field independent would have an easier time seeing it because they're not so bound by this idea. So this learning style, field dependent more generally, and I did a little Googling on this, relying on structure and receiving direction. I've had a few thesis students like this. They simply will not take a breath without the instruction from somebody else, whereas others are remarkably independent. They prefer autonomy and self-direction. In fact, I had another student that really did his or her own thing, to a fault, you could argue. So we all know these sorts of self-starters, and this is not considered to be a pejorative, but some really do have some need for structures, and others are strongly prefer autonomy. Another thing, and I think there's real validity to this, reflexivity, impulsivity. The extent to which a child delays a response in the course of searching for the correct alternative. So their job in this image, let me blow it up a smidge, is to find the bear that, excuse me, I'm struggling a little bit here. Thanks for waiting. Oh boy. Is to find the bear that, well, that's it. Class is canceled. Lord have mercy. To find the bear that's the same as the top bear. And so if I were impulsive, I would offer a quick response, where those that are the opposite of that would meander on it a bit to make sure they got the correct answer and delay their answer. I went to graduate school with somebody that was very plotting in her communication style, seemed to strain for every word for fear of ever saying the wrong thing. I think maybe she took it to an extreme, but nonetheless, I think you have differences in a cognitive style that reveals this sort of thing. So this idea, a second example of different types of cognitive styles has been called cognitive tempo, or the style of reflexivity, impulsivity. To the extent to which a child delays response during the course of searching for the correct alternative in a context of response uncertainty. And of course, we just saw that with the matching figures test. So if I were contemplative, I would take longer to deliver the answer. On the other hand, if I was speedy and impulsive, then of course I would deliver an answer that could be wrong. Now, you've probably known people with both of those quote unquote styles, but that is something that we see individual differences on, that people can be broadly divided into two camps. Now, there's another interesting idea with cognitive styles, and this one's fairly new. It only dates to 1982. And I know you think that's 42 years ago, but in the overall scheme of things, that's pretty recent. Need for cognition. It's a recently coined term, 82, Cacioppo and Petty. I think Cacioppo is still alive. And in this case, basically you have 18 questions that determine whether a person just has the need to ruminate on things that don't affect them directly. So for instance, I would prefer complex to simple problems, number 1. Number 15, I would prefer a task that's intellectual, difficult, and important to one that's somewhat important but doesn't need much thought. Number 17, it's enough for me that something gets the job done. I don't care how or why it works. That's reverse scored. Number 10, the idea of relying on thought to make my way to the top appeals to me. So if you just are a contemplative person, you enjoy ruminating and playing with the inner parts of things, even mentally, it could be said based on these 18 questions that you are high on need for cognition. That's a plausible assertion. So a couple assertions about learning styles. And honestly, learning styles are out of fashion. That doesn't mean they're wrong or they're incorrectly asserted. But I think there is some, I don't know, something in the culture of psychologists that find learning styles or uncool. But there are two broad hypotheses. One is that instruction is effective when it matches learning styles, and this is the one that really draws a lot of arrows. And a similar one is we should tailor instructions to learning styles. These are kind of hard things to do, and your author asks somewhat rhetorically, are some people visual learners and other verbal learners? Well, I suppose that's possible. There's a lot of evidence for or against. I would say of now, 2024, this idea of learning styles is kind of out of fashion, but that doesn't mean it's incorrect or that the idea is folly. I will say one thing, if I can give you an example. If there's one thing that's sort of out of vogue in the realm of therapy, it's the psychodynamic approach that was largely launched by Freud 100 plus years ago. Now, even though it's out of vogue, even though modern practitioners tend to eschew it, there's no evidence that is patently ineffective. That if you're in a therapy session and you engage in that sort of practice or that approach to things, it's probably just as effective in the long haul as any other therapy type. So whether something's fashionable or not, like learning styles, which is decidedly out of fashion of late, it's not an indication of its general effectiveness. The fullness of time will reveal that, and I don't think we're there quite yet.